Abhay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, villagers. Ben Casnocha here, and really excited to have um, Abhay Parasnis, the CEO of Typeface, with us this morning for a masterclass. And Abhay is really a legend in Silicon Valley, CPO and CTO of Adobe. In the last few years, has been running Typeface, which has just had torrent growth and really changed the conversation around generative AI in the enterprise. So we're going to have a conversation for the next 50 minutes or so. I'm going to start with some questions. I'll come to many of your questions. So if you have questions or thoughts, you can put it in the chat. This is like a normal Zoom meeting, so I'll call on you. You can unmute yourself. You can ask your question. Feel free to have your video on or off. But excited to get into a bunch of Abhay's thoughts on the future of Gen AI, as well as techniques and best practices for building incredible startups in Silicon Valley, because he's seen so much. So Abhay, welcome. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me, and great to see everyone. And really exciting to see you guys doing this for all the kind of founders and early stage companies. So it's great to be here.
Indeed. So Abhay, you launched Typeface at very recently at a sort of specific moment in AI's evolution. Tell us what you saw that made you think now is the time, and what was kind of the founding story of how you got the company off the ground.
Yeah, no, I mean, it depends, by the way. Some days it feels like we just launched it, and some days it feels like we've been at it for a decade or more, just the pace of what's going on in the market, as all of your kind of attendees here can attest to in AI. Actually, we started the company in May of 2022, so roughly 6 months before the Chat GPT kind of the moment, if you will. And so as much as I can claim some brilliance or like perfect timing, the whole thing, I mean, I would say probably not as glamorous to say, but the reality is a lot of times these things, the timing is not something, it ended up being more of we were at the right place, right time relative to the AI inflection point that has certainly happened since then and it's playing out now. But there were some structural beliefs we had when I started. As you alluded, I was at Adobe for 8 years prior to that, leading all technology and product as a CTO and CPO. And it's an amazing company, world-class products. But I was seeing a consistent trend that the world of data has gone through a pretty big transformation over the last decade or so, with the move to the cloud and all the big data, all the platforms like Snowflake, Databricks on one side, the analytics. But the world of content comparatively was still in the enterprise, had not gone through big transformation. And so the belief we had was, if there is a step function change in technology that we can bring to bear in terms of how companies can massively create personalized content at scale. I mean, in some ways, as consumers, a lot of us are nowadays used to what Spotify gives us in personalized playlist, or Netflix gives us, or Amazon recommends precisely the perfect product at the right time. But if you think about it, outside of those three or four, or YouTube has an unbelievable recommendation system, outside of those 4 or 5 platforms, most enterprises struggle to even deliver one version of their website, one version of their app, and the personalization is still very much a holy grail that nobody has cracked. And so that's kind of where we started. The belief was AI for the first time can really unlock that content personalization at scale challenge that companies have.
And what was your initial go-to-market? I understand that you actually started talking to a lot of big Fortune 500 companies to start, not smaller organizations. What was your thinking there?
I would say the couple of things we were a little bit different and intentional from day one, which is one, while there is obviously a lot of real value in kind of the PLG grassroots, kind of get the users to tell you, which obviously has significant value. But for the kind of product and business we were going to build, we knew early on that the large enterprise is the target market. One, because they have significant budgets, they have significant pain around the problem we are trying to solve. And so we actually said, even though, by the way, and there is a little bit of an unfair advantage we had because of either my background or founding team, we knew a lot more large enterprise kind of C-level relationships rather than kind of saying, let's just put something out and see if it works, which itself has a lot of value, to be clear. And we do that as well, get feedback. So one, we said, let's go to the biggest of the big. And if we can crack that end of the market, it's hard, but if we can crack that, then you become very sticky and very hard to dislodge. And so that's probably the one thing. And maybe, Ben, I'll just say, I'm sure we'll get to, The other thing we decided as a result is partner very early with the biggest platform players in the market. And so Google and Microsoft in particular, we said we are going to go very deep early on, not just on technology, but commercial partnership. And then later Salesforce also joined. I know you and I have talked about that.
Yeah.
So for us, that enterprise focus has served us well.
And so, what are the sort of key pieces of advice that you would give to an early stage entrepreneur trying to establish a relationship with a large enterprise, especially if you're an AI or emerging software? Like, what are the best practices for consummating a sale like that?
There is not really one silver bullet, unfortunately, that, hey, if you do this, it will open the enterprise doors. That said, I do think there are a few things that I can definitely say that have worked well for us. That doesn't mean, and by the way, also we are at application tier. So it's also important to know where in the stack, who the buyer is, what the economic model is. But one I would say is if you're going to go after the enterprise, high-end enterprise, by the way, and by that I mean Fortune 100, Fortune 500, some of the like biggest companies in consumer electronics, CPG, retail, financial services, that kind of enterprise. One, we kind of said the big platform players have a very strong advantage of distribution and relationships in those accounts that if we can ride with them, if they can actually introduce us, if our value prop is mutually complementary to their platform bet. So the one thing I would encourage people here is when there is a big shift like AI that's happening, the biggest platform players have a significant strategic motivation to win that battle, because for this is the Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, and so they are looking for interesting use cases and workflows that actually show power of their platforms, because they're building platforms, but they're not building every single application necessarily. And so if you can orient yourself where you become one of their best showcase proof points on their platform for their models, like early on, we were one of the early showcase companies for Google's Gemini and imaging models in the enterprise. I mean, they were obviously doing their own consumer offering, but we were one of the first partners that took it into some of the largest enterprises, and they loved it because then we were kind of driving that.
Got it. And so further to that question then, so now say you're talking to the Googles of the world about partnering with them on distribution. So it's sort of the indirect path to the large enterprise. What do you think? And you probably saw a lot of this from the other side of the table when you were at Adobe, getting pitched, I'm sure, by tons of startups wanting to do deals with Adobe. Like, what are common mistakes founders make when trying to get the attention of the Googles of the world to broker these kinds of partnerships to unlock go-to-market?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I would say there are two lessons or two paths in big companies like that. First of all, each company is different. You have to really understand what is their fundamental motivation at any given point. So first, if you don't, I mean, even though these companies are massive and multi-billion revenue companies, at any given time, couple of big bets matter the most to them. So knowing what that pain point is for them, you really have to understand that. Because if you just go and say, hey, help me because you're a multi-billion-dollar company with thousands of customers and just introduce me, their salespeople have zero interest. I mean, they're not going to do that. If you walk in and say, you know what, your strategic bet right now that you are being measured on this year is how many Gemini wins you are going to get as a seller. And I can actually help potentially because we have an interesting application or an interesting use case that showcases the power. So finding what those strategic unlock points are for them. And it will not be in revenue because the startup is not going to be able to go into a Google and say, I can add incremental $5 billion of revenue for you. That's not going to happen.
So,
But you,
so are you saying it's not gonna, so that makes sense. You're not gonna be able to move the needle on Google's revenue as a startup, but are you suggesting that we should look at the individual metrics and KPIs of an individual sales rep and like broker it that way, or what level of scale we're
I
talking
think
about?
it's two levels. That's a great framing, Ben. One, you have to really understand that the on the ground, what sellers are motivated by is very different than maybe what the exec kind of a
Mm,
strategic leadership is. And I think if you as a startup have to navigate, you have to navigate this at both levels. One, at the high level, they do care about consumption of their services and models and getting adoption. And if you are one of the thought leading showcase applications or you have something innovative, they always like to showcase that because it shows their platform well. But then you have to quickly become very much tactically focused around individual sellers have their quota and their numbers to make. They don't care about what their PR or conference announcement or who was the keynote demo. I mean, they'll care about it for a day, but then they care about, is this application or startup going to help me sell more of what I need to sell, and actually unlock more value? So I would say building that deeper understanding of what motions are working for them, where their big bets are, is pretty crucial.
I think it's a great point, and just to sort of amplify and sort of restate, because I think it's a good important insight, which is number one, like understand what's driving the customer. This is one of these sort of cliches in business that happen to be very, very true. It reminds me of a quote I often invoke from Lucas Bywald, the CEO of Weights and Biases, at a Village event a few months ago. Said, everyone says you should spend time talking to your customer. You probably don't spend enough time talking to your customer, even though you know that that's a principle of business. So like however much time you're spending is not enough.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's like it's a simple point, but it's very deeply true, which in this case is like understand what's driving the customer. But I think you're making a nuanced point, which is really helpful when we think about, it probably applies to direct sales too, but at least talking about sort of channel partners like Google, both understand the macro strategy of Google and Gemini and how they're playing in the market, but then also get very in touch with the lower level person's individual OKRs, KPIs, whatever. And you want to be able to have a value prop that resonates at kind of both levels.
And absolutely. And if I can add one more thing, and this is something we are trying to do ourselves in our own journey, by no means, you also have to understand ultimately it's the customer value and the ROI and unlock that's going to matter for both of these pieces of like, it doesn't matter if what ultimately, if all you focus on is what these partners care about, it's not going to matter unless it also translates into what the customer is going to say. To your point, I know it sounds cliche, but as a result, one concrete decision we took, which again at the time seemed like potentially controversial, we not only went after a partnership with one large platform player, we went after three. So Google, Microsoft, and Salesforce. And there is an argument against it saying, hey, what about focus? You're a small company. Are you really going to get distracted? But the reality is, enterprises do choose different partners and different vendors and different layers of the stack. They have nuanced different views. And we took the view of customers will guide us. Because if I look at the large enterprise, it's not all owned by just Microsoft or just Google or just Salesforce or just Adobe. So you're going to have to kind of figure out, can you be a value add to multiple ecosystems and then become a trusted partner for those customers?
Well, and I think playing the big companies off each other is also a smart tactic, right? And so one way that you can create urgency is to induce FOMO. And yes, even Google feels FOMO at this level of maturation. And so saying, hey, I just had a great meeting with Microsoft last week. You know, things are really picking up there. Would love to sit down with you. Like those sorts of subtle.
And that helps. I mean, you said it better. That was implied in my kind of comment. By
Yeah.
the way, and they are actually pretty good about it. In case some of the founders are wondering, like, hey, pulling off one of these is hard enough, but wouldn't they get pissed if you are like trying to simultaneously? Actually, they recognize, especially in a space like AI, that they are actually kind of, they like companies who are actually pushing and innovating. And like, so we were very transparent when we were working with arguably companies that view each other as competitors, that we are going to push the limits. And hey, this model on text is better on this ecosystem right now, but these models are better on the other ecosystem.
So, and if anyone wants to dig in on any of these sales points, feel free to put your question in the chat and I can call on you. Abhay, one question that a founder submitted in advance of this conversation was, how can you tell if a prospect, let's say it's a partner like Google or even an end customer prospect, is for real in their interest? Right now, there's so much hype around AI. There's so much AI curiosity that a lot of the AI startups who are on this call can get an initial meeting. They can get initial interest because there's the kind of, oh, I want to learn more about what you're working on. And there's a lot of nodding of heads and
Yeah.
enthusiastic platitudes, but then it can stall out. The process can stall. And so what do you look for to know, to sort of qualify leads and say, this is worth my time versus this is just, especially if it's a big company, this is going to be an endless bureaucratic process. I should move on.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I don't know, I would say that I have the silver bullet answer, but I'll offer a perspective and would love to hear, obviously, if there are others who have. But that I would say in AI in particular, as somebody who was fortunate, I participated in the cloud shift at Adobe and Azure at Microsoft. This is different in a couple of ways. The rate of change and the level of excitement and interest is obviously off the charts and every day, so which is good thing. As you said, it opens a lot of doors. The problem is it's also very noisy because pretty much everyone out there will be willing to say, I have a use case, I have some innovation budget here just to try something. And so the challenge for founders and maybe companies that are early stage is to be very discriminating around which of these are actually use cases that have real long-term repeatable legs versus which of these are just somebody just wanting to kick tires on some AI model and they want some kind of a outsourced development partner who they are going to use as a startup. So I would say we did see this, Ben, as I was sharing with you earlier, first year of AI, 2023, in some ways, there was a lot of innovation budgets, one-off projects, and people were willing to engage, even at the high end of the enterprise. But then very quickly, you would realize that after the 90-day pilot is done or something, they don't really have a path to take it forward because they didn't have the budget or they didn't have the operational kind of the structure. So one thing I look for these days, by the way, it is changing now, at least in the enterprise. Companies are starting to. So there are three tells I would tell you that we are using right now. One, are you talking to kind of these innovation groups inside a company, or are you actually talking to the line of business owner who has a real top line and bottom line number that they have to deliver? So that's a, I mean, I know I'm generalizing, but if you're not talking to the real business owner and you're just talking to somebody who is kind of head of AI or innovation or projects, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it's probably going to have a harder path to become mainline into that company. Number one. Number two, if they are not very crisp about very narrow specific use cases with very specific pain points, and they are like, yeah, let's just try ChatGPT or let's just try something, the more you can pinpoint a specific ROI and a specific pain point that you think you can solve for them. A lot of founders may counterintuitively think, hey, but if I push them and what if the software doesn't deliver that ROI? I think you are better off taking that risk and forcing a much more harder definition of success. Customers who push us on, hey, if it delivers this ROI, then I am very convinced. If it doesn't, we won't continue. I think then you know it's real because they are really focused on it. And the last one, as much as it pains me to say this, the more legal scrutiny you are getting subjected to, the more likely this is a more real, meaningful thing for their business versus if projects that are never going to go production, that are never going to go live. In our deals, we spend still a lot of time today with lawyers, unfortunately, in those companies at the high end, because they want to do all the indemnification, copyright, legal violations. But then you know they're serious because they are really caring about this thing.
Okay, so let me just summarize that because I think those are three great points. So, how can you tell if a prospective customer is serious? Number one, are you talking to a real business owner, someone with real P&L responsibility, or have you been relegated to like an innovation skunkworks pop-up group or something who may or may not have juice to actually make something happen? Point number two was, is the ROI really demonstrable? Is it obvious? Is there some specific problem they're trying to solve that your product is filling? And then point three was, if you're getting a lot of legal scrutiny and you're talking to lawyers and getting red lines, that's actually a good sign, even if it's frustrating in the moment. Okay, I like that. So that's great. And we shared this in a recent masterclass, but it's one of my favorite nuggets from one of our portfolio CEOs who also says, you know, you're serious if you're on a texting basis with the prospect. If you're just on email, it's not serious. But if you have their cell phone number and you're texting, that means they're actually pretty far down the pipeline. I guess maybe I want to shift a little bit to the sort of future of product in AI and where you see differentiation and sort of moats forming in the ecosystem today, Abhay. And I wonder if you could first just maybe start with your general take on AI startups building at the application layer. What's defensible these days? What's not? How would you think about the sort of roadmap or sort of the landscape strategically?
I think, I mean, first of all, this is a pretty, as you know, Ben, a lot of debates going on actively every day, every week, and the lines are still evolving quite a bit. There are few beliefs we have always had, and not a surprise given where we are focused. Early on in the AI, we kind of said, hey, foundation platform layer is going to be very difficult for startups to innovate on. Does not mean impossible. There are companies doing it. But relatively speaking, there's so many business processes and so many industry focused workflows you can focus on, that if you can develop a unique viewpoint by combination of deep understanding of certain workflows or industries or both, and then marry your understanding of these underlying AI platforms. I mean, what companies are struggling with, they cannot keep up with the pace of change. I mean, there's no question they cannot keep up with all these models, and every day there is a new thing. And just when they thought they were settling on GPT 4.0 and DeepSeek comes along, and like everyone is like, that's completely throwing everything off. But they also have a deep understanding of their business. And so what they need is partners who can bridge the two worlds. So we kind of said that application tier, where you deeply marry understanding of either of a business process, which in our case is kind of marketing and customer experience is what we focus on. And then go even within that certain industries, how CPG and retail works, how financial services works, and then say our unique secret sauce is not a better version of a GPT model or this or that, is how those models actually contextualize in your business process. So I would say I'm a big believer is that application tier is where the real number of breakthroughs that are going to accumulate over, just because of the variation in the business processes and industries that exist. Number one. I do think, Ben, to your point though, this notion of what is a moat, I actually think even I'm changing my own viewpoint every day, because for a while, the naive or simple answer, what seems like naive answer was, well, if you own the workflow, then you can build a moat. Well, it turns out with what's starting to happen with agents and agentic automation, even the workflow layer itself is actually not going to be that safe, because the richer context that you can actually build into these systems, even the notion of what automation of workflows meant in the world of SaaS applications is going to completely change, because these agents are almost now going to disrupt what the classical definition. And I won't be surprised if the same way today debate is between platform and app layer, tomorrow the debate will be workflow to agent layer. And I think you're starting to see this already.
Well, I think it's fascinating. I see, some of the folks on this call, Alex Berman and others. If you want to join into this conversation, you're welcome to, because we have a lot of companies thinking this through right now, which is a really esoteric or niche workflow, say in financial services. And the part of the thesis is that that's defensible, that's ownable by a startup. Too hard, like a foundation model is not going to encompass every niche esoteric use case in a regulated sector like financial services. But you're right. It's interesting to think about the future of agents in that regard. And so how are you, what are you advising your customers, or how do you think about the next 12 to 24 months in terms of what territory agents will cover? And then what does that mean, I guess, for early stage startups building at the application layer today?
Yeah, see, it's interesting. And I'm glad you went to a customer. There's one other defensible moat I think about, which may seem a little bit counterintuitive, and then I'll answer your question, which is everything I talk so far is about evolution of the tech stack, from platforms to this application tier adoption of AI to now agents. And there's this whole debate around RL centric approach, like what DeepSeek is doing. Is that fundamentally going to disrupt the kind of the quote unquote the OpenAI approach? Or so there's lots of technology things we can bet on. I actually think, Ben, the real moat we are seeing in the enterprise is the change management and helping companies go through their process change and people change and culture change is in fact the harder thing that companies are struggling with. And if they think a startup or a company is going to be a great partner for them, not just in giving them some technology, but it's actually going to become a part and parcel of their change management journey. I mean, this is one of the reasons why you see companies like Accenture, which have a different business model, why they are so successful early out of the gate on AI is because they are approaching this not maybe from the best in class tech packaged assets, but they are like, we will partner with you on your change management journey. We'll figure this out with you. I think that's something startups, I know in the Silicon Valley at least, it's a little bit of a counter fashionable thing to say, focus on service. Everyone is like, no, only do software like that. I actually think in AI, and we are, by the way, we are living this, we are seeing this. the value customers are putting on us, not just as a technology platform provider, but a thought partner that's actually going to help them navigate their complex change management,
I
is
mean,
ultimately very valuable.
I think it's fascinating. I think it's a really novel point. Like in all of the things you hear and read about and experience, all of us in AI implementations, I think this point is so quickly overlooked. So it's fantastic to underscore, which is it's how can you be a partner, a consultative partner to your customer as they navigate this new era. And admittedly, I think that's challenging for a lot of startups and especially younger first-time entrepreneurs who earlier in their career they may not have as much context on just what it means for a large enterprise to go through a major sort of digital transformation. I wonder if Neil Robertson, I see you on. If you want to turn your camera on, if you have a sec. I thought your question on looking for custom training data was interesting, and also you want to introduce yourself because you actually are an example of a repeat founder who can very capably, I think, guide an organization, in this case HR, through the future of AI.
Yeah, I was actually just taking a note on what you said. I think positioning yourself as a partner is an interesting strategy in the market. We're definitely seeing people respond really to like base educational content, especially in HR, where they're on kind of day zero of a whole big transformational change. So the product that we're building is helps HR teams answer repetitive employee questions by ingesting policies and procedures and then giving them instant answers wherever they get those questions, and then eventually automating more of the repetitive HR tasks and workflow that are out there. One of the things that I keep coming back to in my own analysis of our product roadmap is when is it time to spend significant energy on custom data and training sets. Just because of the nature of our product, we don't need to do that now. But I feel like as we get closer to the agentic side of things, it becomes more and more important to be thinking about that. But I haven't really seen any good conversation around that. Either you're a Series B company like a Harvey and you've already done it, or you're a pre-seed company like us and you're just sort of doing whatever you can. What's your opinion on that?
That's a very insightful question. And if I were to say one, I mean, amongst many, one thing I would do differently all over again if I were to go back to day one of Typeface is more aggressively embrace custom data training strategy in our product roadmap because like you said, there's always a little bit of this fear around, well, first of all, it's going to be expensive, or how do you even accumulate what is the data strategy? Oh, and that's a purview of the big guys. You're not really going to be able to do it, or maybe let me first get the product market fit and then I can start that. I think that's probably, if there's one thing definitively I can say we probably should have done earlier. Now we are doing a lot of it, is early on, however narrow. You don't have to start by boiling the ocean, but start developing against the narrow use cases or domains that you are pointing your product and business at. Start accumulating distinct data, domains, and strategies early on for two reasons. First, I do think that's ultimately the product differentiation in AI. But second, actually the side effect is it's going to build internal muscle and capability in your engineering and product organization that you otherwise wouldn't build.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, well, thanks, Neil, for that. Alex Berman, I wonder if we could bring you up if you want to come off or turn your video on, because I think your question here is really interesting about data privacy, kind of connects to the previous question. Alex, do you want to ask that question?
Sure. So I thought the point around, the more interested the legal teams are, the more traction you have. And just for context, we're building a solution at what previously used to be called Cabernet.ai, will soon be called Precision Finance, to help people build financial models at large asset managers. So I'm curious, as you've had these discussions across sort of your largest enterprise customers, where do they sort of draw the lines in terms of what is proprietary data versus not? And do you have any principles you've sort of thought through in terms of this can feed back into the app and how it operates versus not?
Yeah, no, Alex, I mean, and again, each industry, as you know, I mean, financial services, healthcare, a lot. I think it's going to vary a lot by industry, and then within industry, also by the way of geography. So one, I would say, hey, be open-minded. I think the notion of owning data sets and proprietary data happens to be the number one thing that right now works in our favor, versus why shouldn't I just ingest all my data into a public chat GPT like platform? And I think they deeply care about that ownership. They do care about, by the way, the guaranteed auditability of that. Like when we say we will not leak your data and weights back into the platform, they do subject us to pretty stringent scrutiny. So I would say this is one where if you can actually step up and offer that, it is one of the biggest reasons why they work with startups. They feel a little bit more comfort if they think their security team signs off on the controls in place.
Awesome, because we're having these conversations right now, and our lawyers have basically said, to your point, we have the advantage of, an open landscape. And so it's really top of mind for us where we think we actually can suck data back into the platform. And I don't know if you've thought about that in depth.
We actually, I mean, again, don't know enough about your business and industry. We actually early on took, and this was a little bit controversial decision internally, because my head of AI research was like, hey, that's not what you should do. But we actually said everything that customers train and the data they bring, we are going to actually partition and let them completely control. We are not going to bleed it back in, which strategically could be disadvantageous at some level for us to commingle. But when you are dealing with Fortune 100, I mean, that is what they expect and care. So they are not, so we actually don't. We maintain a very hard line, Alex. But I would say it's not a universally right answer. I can easily argue why the other side may be a better strategy. That's just, we chose to just give that peace of mind in order to penetrate those. And I know that answers your question, but we don't actually commingle data sets at all.
Cool. Super helpful.
Yeah,
Thanks.
great Question, Alex. And Abhay, do you want to just speak to pricing? So many of our companies are this is such a fast moving dynamic. How do you price these AI products? What's your kind of best thinking right now on pricing right in Gen AI?
Yeah, this is the fun part of right now being in this space, which is literally every single topic is a massive multi-dimensional puzzle that you have to solve. The technology is changing, companies change management. I think pricing, Ben, I mean, you probably have, I'm sure, more of a broad perspective talking to a lot of companies. For us, and I was just talking to Aaron Levy at Box. He has talked about this different pricing models in SaaS, like AI evolving and stuff. I would say there are two, again, you have to really be clear what end of the market you are serving. So for us, because we are going after the super high end of the enterprise market, first of all, they're not as price sensitive. I mean, they're obviously very value sensitive. So one thing I would say is we focused a lot on a value modeling of what is the ROI we are going to deliver for you through the use cases. Like for example, in our case, one of the big products we have is a email marketing product that focuses on how companies do better personalization of their marketing emails through channel. A lot of companies historically pre-AI charge by just number of emails blasted, like 10 million, 20 million, 50, but that's not really a very good value metric. And so what we do now is price based on, hey, what are the level of personalization by audience, by channel, and as a result, can we double your email open click-through rate or open rate? That is a far more valuable construct than can I send 40 million emails instead of 20 million, because
So you're pricing based on the amount of personalization?
well, again, it sounds not, I mean, it's not like a formulaic thing,
Yeah.
but that's an example where we say, hey, personalization is really what is valuable to you. And can we tie it to actual email open rates? And one of the nice things about value-based pricing is if you find the right value metrics that the customer cares about, what you will find is they're far less price sensitive because it's directly going to tie to their top line business. Versus if you are in a commodity pricing, a lot of companies when we started, by the way, were charging by the number of words generated or number of images generated. And we kind of felt that was going to be a downhill slippery slope because underlying platform will just keep cutting prices as they have to. And then you will be in a position of having to defend Why are your prices not dropping proportional to GPT-3 cutting their prices by 100% or Gemini? So we kind of early on said we are not going to price by number of words or images. We are going to price by the outcomes for the use cases. And so one thing I would say, Ben, is I think AI, and especially as you get to agents, people are going to realize potentially the per user SaaS seat pricing is not really going to work necessarily for all kinds of workflows. It may still work for some, um, but like call center category is another one where this is happening, where for the longest time people have sold by the number of call service agents, the seats. But the problem is if AI agents are meant to disrupt that whole model, then it is actually not in your interest to say, I will sell you by per seat, because in some ways your goal should be to actually optimize the actual reducing the call service touch points and volume rather than increasing the number of agents. And
100%. I
so,
think, and there's this cannibalistic dynamic happening in AI with a lot of large tech companies, which is fascinating. Shifting a little bit to fundraising and financing these startups. How much money did you raise in your first round? Because I know you've raised now a ton of money overall. What was the seed round like for Typeface?
yeah, I mean, and you know this is your world. These days, the definition of seed and A
Yeah.
and B, it's a little bit kind of a blurry
Yeah.
lines. But anyway, our first round, we raised 25 million.
Okay.
Um,
And then you've raised like more than 200 million total, or what's the?
no, like we raised 165.
Okay.
Yeah.
165 million. And so what is the like if you could go back and do it over again, day one of Typeface, would you do anything differently from a fundraising perspective, both how much you raised, from whom, how you drove the processes, what milestones you hit before raising the next round?
First of all, being more open to the market dynamics and as things change and being not dogmatic about what you decided early on is probably the one lesson I would take and tell my day one version of myself on Typeface is don't be too fixated on having precise strategies around only these firms and only this round. Like, for example, I had actually said I will not even fundraise for the first 12 to 24 months, that we didn't want to do fundraising at all. But then we had a set of circumstances. The one thing I would encourage, if I mean I'm biased, but back to that strategic kind of partnerships with the big players, the one thing I would double down and do all over again, I know you asked what would I not do, is we early on said, hey, we are really going to get not just venture investors, which obviously are amazing, they have other advantages, but we are also going to get some strategic investors, because our go to market was enterprise, and we felt that their money was actually potentially kind of more valuable in some ways, because it was not just the money, it was actually their brand, their unlocking effect. That
Which
is
I
the
think
one.
is I think it's interesting, Abe, because strategic investors have been kind of low status in Silicon Valley over the years.
For
Like
a
when
long time.
it used to be if you met with a founder and they said, "Oh, we just raised from blah big company's venture arm," you're like, "Oh, I guess every traditional VC in Silicon
And
Valley
no,
passed."
yeah, exactly.
Um, but you're right. I think when there's a real reason and an edge that you get, especially in customer development, that can be really valuable.
And in fact, to your point, Ben, when I was fundraising, we were fortunate. There were some really high profile tier one VC firms were interested. We obviously didn't want to dilute too much early on. And so we said no, but we are going to go the strategic route. We split, but there were a number of extremely close friends and well-wishers, and they only had the best in mind for me. They were like, you're making a huge mistake. These strategics are not seen as a great investor at all. That's seen as a tier two or three. But the reality is the way AI game is playing out right now, they are actually turning out to be extremely valuable partners. So that's one thing I would tell founders here. If you have that ability and if you have that option, consider that, because in the AI space, it is a little bit different venture dynamic so far than pre-AI.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and then just to underscore your earlier point about be open and flexible, I mean, it's interesting. I think on the one hand, founders have to present a plan, present a vision. A pitch is always stronger when the founder is saying, here are my milestones over the next 12 months, the 18 months, and once I get to 3 million ARR, I want to raise my next round and unlock the next chapter of growth. Like there is there's something to sort of specificity of a vision and the confidence in conveying it. And at the same time, recognizing that anything can happen and that sometimes you have to really adapt and change. That's also key. And so both conveying that in the pitch as well as living it seems vital.
And if I may add one thing though, now while lots of things are different, I think in my mind, one thing is still the same. And maybe if I could reinforce the value of betting on people, like specific people, and not getting carried away with the who is giving me slightly higher valuation or slightly better brand. The specific partners and individuals that you have that I know it's going to sound cliche, but I thought I always felt that even back then. But 2 years in, 3 years in, I actually think if I were to go back, I would make that be the only criteria. I mean, I think it was a primary criteria.
The only criteria being the humans that you'd be working with?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the firms matter, their pockets matter, their brand matters. But ultimately, and by the way, the strategics I said matter for different reasons. But the specific partners that are actually going to be in the trenches with you day in, day out, and are they going to really have the compatibility with you? I would over rotate and pick on that. I mean, obviously, it's easy to say that if you have raised money. All I would just highlight is that's actually probably the biggest determinant of your success post funding than the funding check itself.
David from ISA, do you want to turn your video on and ask your question about value-based pricing, just to go back for a sec to that topic?
Yeah, so sorry to go back to it, and nice to meet you. Yeah, so we have this situation.
And introduce yourself too and what you're working on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. What we are making is agentic process automation. It's from RPA. Now we are introducing agentic process automation. So you don't need to define the workflow. It's generated by code on real time. So we are horizontal. We go to the companies. They love the demo. They love their product. They have first the automation assessment, the problem that you said. They love it, but they don't know what use cases, and that's why we are focusing on verticals. The problem is that we are creating at the end digital workers, specialized agents, right? And our purpose is not to be always in the loop. Like, I don't want them to call me every time that they want to create a new agent. I want them to simply keep creating them. So yeah, I can start with 5 use cases. With finance, we are starting with know your customer, risks, and this type, and I can value price that, and I can estimate how much I'm going to save or increase the revenues or make it faster. But when I want to scale that, I don't want to be always in the loop, and they don't want me to be always there and have this dependency. So how can I, if I am not in the loop, create a value-based pricing in the sense that I can see what's the value that each agent that is created it's giving them. That's the kind of issue we are running right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, David, that's a fascinating, and I think I spent in my prior career when I was at Microsoft, I have a bunch of familiarity with the whole RPA workflow. I think that space that you are in is probably one of the most exciting spaces that's going to go through transformation with these agents. So first, pretty excited about your journey. I mean, would love to learn more what you're doing. I do think that's an example of an interesting journey from where I sit. That's going to have to go through a fundamental economic transformation, because in some ways, the RPA and pre-RPA version of BPA products have really kind of almost reinforced the exact opposite pricing model of automation-oriented transactional pricing. Like, how many clicks can we automate on a screen? And I think people got to a point where it was very formulaic. Like, can I actually automate these forms with 20 clicks, and that's how we are going to price? I think where, if I were you, I mean, I don't claim to know your kind of product and business deeply at all, is you're almost, and I actually think RPA space is going to go through this gut-wrenching transformation, is go almost at the other end of the spectrum, which is what's the end outcome that process is actually delivering for your company, and what are its economic metrics, and try your product's value to that. Because if you kind of said, hey, we are going to disrupt RPA with agentic system, technologically, that's going to happen. I'm very convinced. But if you're not careful, and looks like that's what you're seeing, they'll probably pull you into the same RPA style pricing models, which is just price it by number of transactions that the agent is automating, which is not what you would want to do. I think you would want to do, no, this agent is going to actually drive X amount of improvement in your top line. And what is that worth to you? I think that is a change management journey. By the way, it's also going to dislocate the jobs in those companies, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So
fascinating. Let's leave at that. And David, thank you for the question. Abhay, just in the last minute or two we have, you mentioned things are changing so quickly in Gen AI. For all of us, we're all trying to keep up with what's going on. You mentioned talking to Aaron Levy earlier. Like, who are the people who you talk to, and what are the things that you're reading to kind of keep up on it all? Are there any go-to sources, writers, people on Twitter, other CEOs who really feel like they have the finger on the pulse of the future of AI?
yeah, I mean, man, that is a broad topic. I, I mean, I think I would say this is one I do consciously try a lot, but I feel like I'm woefully inadequate these days, especially with AI, is just staying extremely wide and open to different, whether people at the technology layer reading papers that are being presented at one level of the stack, to people who are more in the incumbent industries who are approaching AI differently. So I don't know, unfortunately, Ben, if I have a short, like, hey, here are the three people I think it's probably hundreds of probably people at different levels. But the one thing I will say, and that's actually how you and I actually originally met, is there are some really, really interesting and innovative people who actually have formed these very interesting thought networks. And at least, Ben, when you included me in kind of your forum, that was one of the most, I mean, I still have so many kind of specific things I took away from the Grove. So I think, to me, that may be the one thing historically I was very averse to. Oh, I'm not going to go spend time in bunch of these kinds of things because it's like taking me away from building the business. But immersing yourself with people who are on the front line and kind of finding different circles like that is right now one of the best things you can do, because there's just so much changing. But
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think it's peer learning and network intelligence has always been important, but never more so today when things are moving so quickly, and other people in the trenches at the same stage or a stage or two ahead can be invaluable for all of our collective growth. And it's a great note to end on, because that's what this masterclass is all about. And villagers will continue this discussion on Slack. And Abhay, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us this morning. And it's great to have you in the village. And congrats on all of your success with Typeface. You're really forging new ground in the industry, and you're an inspiration to many of us.
thanks, Ben, and all the best to everyone here. Happy to connect anytime. For anything, reach out.
Sounds great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.